The top story on ABC News Breakfast today. Labor's left faction says it won't give up the fight against uranium exports to India. The ALP National Conference wrapped up yesterday and it endorsed a plan to lift the ban on selling uranium to the subcontinent. Julia Gillard says securing that agreement will boost trade and enhance Australia's relationship with the country.
The government will begin negotiations on a deal early next year. Labor left Senator Doug Cameron says India hasn't agreed to adequate nuclear safeguards in the past.
The fight won't be over. I can give you one commitment. The Prime Minister's given some commitments in there. I'll give a commitment that I'll be watching very closely about what we actually do in terms of getting commitments from the Indian government. And if Bush couldn't do it, if the Canadians couldn't do it, I don't think we can.
Labor left convener Doug Cameron there. For more, Melissa Clark joins us now from Canberra. Melissa, good morning. This is an issue that really seems to be splitting the party.
It's splitting the party and interestingly it's also very much splitting the cabinet. Often we see a cabinet approach with a more united positions and a lot of the fighting is done amongst the delegates on the floor. But in this case we saw passionate speeches from cabinet ministers on differing points of view. On one side you had Julia Gillard and Martin Ferguson, Stephen Smith as senior cabinet members who are arguing that this was a necessary step for the Labor Party to take so that the Australian government can allow for exports of uranium to India, not only to assist India but to improve the relationship between the two nations. On the other hand, you had other senior cabinet ministers like Anthony Albanese, the leader of the government in the House, Peter Garrett, who of course now Schools Minister but previously having stood for election as a Nuclear Disarmament Party member, and also Stephen Conroy, who gave a very passionate speech about his family's brushes with nuclear technology and how that impacted his fight against nuclear technology. Yet, of course, the Prime Minister in the end prevailed. The vote on the floor was around 206 to 185 in favour of changing that policy. So the Prime Minister got her way. And interestingly, one of the top union leaders, the AWU's Paul Howes, made it very clear that the Prime Minister worked very hard to make sure this outcome fell in her favour, as he explained it yesterday after the conference.
This is an important issue for the country. It's an important issue for jobs. It's an important issue for ensuring that we assist one of our best trading partners in the form of India in its transition to a low-carbon energy future in the future. It's an important victory for the Prime Minister herself because she delivered the day. And frankly, if it wasn't for the Prime Minister, this outcome wouldn't have been as strong as it was on the floor of conference.
Labor power broker there, Paul Howes. So the left is vowing to fight on. In the aftermath, though, of a really fascinating national conference, the number of issues that were left resolved and unresolved include asylum seekers as well as uranium. What are we left with at the end of this three-day talkfest?
Well, what we have is, yes, uranium being ticked through as Julia Gillard wanted, a progression there in the uranium policy of the ALP. When it comes to asylum seekers, Chris Bowen's proposal that the party adopt a policy that would involve increasing the humanitarian intake of refugees in exchange for a full backing of offshore but regionally placed solution. And also the other critical issue, which is the one where there wasn't the progress made, and that is when it comes to reform of the ALP itself. There were all sorts of pushes being made from different elements about how to reform the ALP to get the rank and file more involved. But the strongest push to have more delegates at the National Conference directly elected there by rank and file members was dismissed by the power brokers themselves, who would have been somewhat pushed aside if they had agreed to that. So they have moved to protect their power base instead of accepting that proposal. That they've done is to set up a committee that will look into greater involvement for the rank and file that's to report back in a year's time. So for all the urgency we've heard about the need for the ALP and other political parties indeed to reform, to keep involving their base to ensure their membership stays at a sustainable level and continues to be representative of the mainstream population, we haven't had any significant action out of the blocks from the ALP to address that.
Good to talk to you, Melissa. Thanks so much.